Joshua. I do the thing. Today I had on a guest named Jacqueline Semple, and she's someone who is a registered acupuncture therapist. I met her a few years ago at a volleyball camp, and she's very big into Eastern tradition and Eastern medicine. And so she is specialized in traditional Chinese medicine. And I was fortunate enough to have her on today and discuss kind of the ins and outs of acupuncture. And she was able to answer lots of questions that I was very curious about. And she's made it a goal of hers to kind of incorporate and include Eastern and Western philosophy and medicine and tradition into each other so that she can create a customized experience for each person that she treats, because that's kind of the juxt of Eastern tradition, is to tailor a therapy for an individual rather than having a cookie cutter for everyone. And so I'll plug her Instagram really quick because I think it's very cool and very important. And so it's Jacqueline TCM, JACQUELIN_TCM. And we talk about a lot of things in this, and I enjoyed it very much. I hope you guys enjoy it. Thank you very much to Jacqueline for coming on. I appreciate it a lot. I hope that we're able to have her on in the future. If you guys have any questions, comment them on the YouTube. If you guys have any fact checks, I love being fact checked. I enjoy being right, but I enjoy being wrong maybe more because it enables me to be right in the future potentially, but also probably not. So thanks a lot. Much appreciated. Hope you guys enjoy. Bye. Okay, we're doing it live. Here we go.
We're live.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. It's something that I've been interested in since I think before my trip to Asia, but especially during my trip to Asia, I developed a lot of interest in Eastern and holistic medicine, and so you seem like the perfect person to talk to about this. What was kind of your introduction into Eastern medicine?
Well, my undergrad at VIU, where I played college volleyball, which is how you and I know each other. I did a sport health and physical education degree, so a phys ed degree. And in one of the graduating courses, it was called spirituality. And I kind of rolled my eyes when I had to take the course. I had never tried meditation or anything like that before. And by that time I was probably 21. So it's a long time to not practice any type of self-awareness practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my mind was blown trying meditation for the first time. I had almost an out-of-body experience. I felt so relaxed after. And also in that class, we dabbled in a naturopathic doctor spoke to our class. We had to take a weekend workshop in something that interested us. So I did my level 1 Reiki cert,
Mm-hmm.
dabbled in that. We learned a little bit about herbal medicine around Vancouver Island. Our professor actually learned from an elder there. And I just thought it was so interesting, this thought of traditional medical practices and medicine from a holistic perspective. So I always knew that my trajectory after that undergrad would be in the preventative holistic realm, but I wasn't sure exactly what. I didn't want to just funnel into physio or chiro. And I definitely didn't want to do the education route. I was more interested in the human body. I love anatomy and physiology, but how could I approach it from a holistic perspective? So that was probably the intro. And then similar as you, I went to India and I got a 200-hour yoga cert there, and I dove pretty hard into some Ayurvedic medicine practices and thought it was really interesting. So that sort of intrigued me a little bit more. And then I fell onto acupuncture. Mm-hmm.
How'd you fall into acupuncture?
Well, I guess I have it's a long story. I'm going to try to make it really short.
Okay.
But when I was 15, I was at the ski hill in my hometown in Fort McMurray, and it was a really warm day in March, and I was there with a few friends, and we were being little shit disturbers and sort of running around, surfing on the ice, and the workers there were like, "You guys, it's really slippery. Slow down. Someone's going to get hurt." And a couple of my friends bailed and wiped out, and we thought it was hilarious. And I went to surf down this patch of ice while pulling a tube behind my back, like this, and my feet slipped right out from under me, and I fell on my back and totally smashed my left humerus into two pieces. I had a complete spiral fracture. I thought I dislocated my elbow at the time because your body goes into shock initially. So I stood up right away and my arm was just flopping. And so I picked it up and I was like, oh my gosh, I dislocated my elbow. And my friends were like laughing. We didn't think I was seriously injured. I had to get taken to the hospital in an ambulance, had to get emergency orthopedic surgery. And anyways, I was in a cast, like a 90-degree cast for a month. And when they took the cast off, my muscles had atrophied so much that my brachial tendon was so short. It was locked at a 90 degree. So I couldn't do rehab. I couldn't do physio. They couldn't straighten my arm. And I was trying for like 2 weeks. I was devastated because club volleyball had just started because I was in grade 10 and that was the biggest thing at the time. And at that physio clinic, there was this Asian practitioner, a male, and I couldn't tell you where he was from, whether he was like Japanese, Korean, or Chinese descent. But he came over and asked if he could perform acupuncture on my arm. And I was terrified, but I was also a little bit desperate to get better. And I was really upset about the whole thing. So I said, give her. And after the first treatment, my arm straightened like 45 degrees. It was halfway there. Instantly, my mind was blown after like 15 minutes of needling. I got up off the table. There was like sweat marks, like dripping puddles by my armpits. I was so nervous. It didn't hurt at all. It was great. And then the second treatment, my arm was completely straight and then rehab began. And I totally forgot about that experience. So I don't know if that planted sort of the seed in my consciousness of what acupuncture could do. But that's sort of what introduced it to me initially. And I think that's how a lot of people get into acupuncture and Chinese medicine, is some type of personal connection, or it really helped someone they knew who had chronic illness or themselves. Yeah. So kind of a cool story, random. It worked really well for me. Acupuncture helped me with chronic nerve pain that resulted from that implant like 5 years later. I'd get really bad bouts of chronic pain that would sort of knock me out for like a week or two at a time. And nothing was helping besides like gabapentin, and saw a bunch of specialists, did a bunch of nerve conductivity testing, couldn't sleep, couldn't work, had extreme skin sensitivity, loss of strength, all the way shooting down to my hand, pins and needles, numbness, sometimes throbbing pain. Chronic pain is the worst. Neuropathy is the worst. So at least that makes me empathetic for the patients I see that have neuropathy and paresthesia and stuff like that. But ever since I started acupuncture school in 2016, I've never had a flare up again. So it's
Really?
pretty awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
What do you, so I know that there's so in Hindi, it's the prama, and in Chinese medicine, it's chi. And I kind of want to know what your perspective is on that. And it's this essence of life, basically.
I think there's a lot of overlap, because you just triggered like a memory in my brain of the prana, and how in Ayurvedic medicine and yoga, they talk about all these thousands of different, I forget if they say meridians or channels that the energy flows through. And that's the same thing in Chinese medicine. So like there's primary and main pathways that the energy can flow through. But within those primary pathways, there's all these other ways that they can connect. So there's internal and external connections from the exterior of the body to internal organs. So that's usually how we do TCM, traditional Chinese medicine style acupuncture, is internal organ theory with meridian theory. So that's kind of how we can tap into the internal body. And I think to try and describe it in a way that's understandable for most people is sort of this, there's new research into fascia and how that's kind of like a communication network in the body now. And I would say that's probably the easiest way to sort of connect it from traditional to modern perspective is, I think that's what the channels and the meridians sort of, what they discovered a long time ago before science did, was the body can communicate to itself in a very, like any area of the body to another area, which doesn't make sense to us visually because we can't see it with the naked eye. But by stimulating certain areas of the body, you can communicate to the rest of the body. And I think we see that with fascia and how that can communicate. And I love that overlap there too. There's actually a lot of similarities between the 12 primary pathways and these fascial lines or fascial trains that have been like really researched by Thomas Myers and other people. If you put the pictures like side by side of, let's say, the bladder channel and the posterior fascial train, they're like the same. And it kind of helps now make a visualization of how this chi flows and communicates.
Right. It's super cool because yeah, I think that that's that bridge behind like so often you talk about Eastern medicine and holistic healing, and people kind of, like you said, when you first experience it, you like roll your eyes at it and you're like, ah, whatever, voodoo, wishy-washy stuff. But in reality, it's more and more. There's coming this bridge between the two, the Eastern and kind of the Western side, and we're realizing more and more. Wow, there actually is a lot of like there's data that we have on this, but it's not. We don't talk about it in the same way. We don't see it in the same way. But they're connected in so many ways, and I think that's really cool. And even so, what you're talking about was it's the bladder meridian, right? The
Yeah.
like going from your ankle into your ear, and like if you have ankle pain and someone sticks a needle in your ear, you're wondering why the heck is that happening, rather than
Yeah, or vice versa. Yeah. Actually, the bladder channel starts right here, and then it goes around the back of the head, down the occiput, and then, yeah, down to the heel to the large pinky toe, or the small pinky toe, the large pinky toe.
yeah.
And just to what you said before, like, I find now, currently right now, there's a lot of emphasis on anti-Asian hate crimes, and my career, my profession is pulling into that a lot as well,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm a white person practicing Chinese medicine, and I have to be, it's my duty to protect this medicine and advocate for it's the merit of it and the efficacy of it, even though it's 2,000 years old. I mean, the scientific method is making a hypothesis and trying things out. And if it works, then you write a paper on it and you can prove that it works. They've been doing this for thousands of years with acupuncture. Like, why is this point good for something? Because for thousands of years, by using it, it worked. So, and even for diagnosis in Chinese medicine, it's based on pattern differentiation. So we're looking at the patient's signs and symptoms, the clinical manifestations that are happening, and we match that up to patterns that are based on theory. And then with those patterns, we choose point prescriptions and points that match with that. So it's pattern differentiation, and holism is basically the foundation of Chinese medicine, which is a scientific method.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, I just think because Western medicine kind of took the forefront for a while, they think that things from other cultures or ways of medicine or science from other cultures that are unknown to them are considered unscientific, when it's just because it's not known to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then as more research comes to light, there's a ton of research on acupuncture and how it works. There needs to be a lot more, but now that it's proven, now people are sort of accepting it more. And I think that's just when you kind of see this colonialism and racism, because now that there's a bit more evidence, it's accepted a bit more, when really it's always worked.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting. There's a lot of advocacy for this now.
Yeah.
Kind of like IMS versus acupuncture. People will accept IMS sometimes because there's a bit more research behind it, but they won't accept acupuncture TCM theory. So it's interesting.
Yeah. What are the main differences between like dry needling and acupuncture TM?
Mm-hmm. TCM, sorry, it's
TCM.
traditional. That's an
Traditional
abbreviation
Chinese
for,
medicine. Yeah.
yeah,
I
it's
was
just
trying to,
easier
yeah.
to say.
No, thank you.
Well, the first thing is, I think if you're someone who's had IMS and it's very successful for you, I think it's awesome. And I also think it's great that other health practitioners are using it, because it shows how effective it is and how it can really make treatment plans more successful. IMS is sort of based strictly on musculoskeletal issues. So pain, like trigger points are tied in there. Usually needles are put into a trigger point, stimulated to relax the tissue or the muscle, and then pain is relieved. Whereas acupuncture and Chinese medicine approach it's a lot more gentle. Like, there can be heavy manipulation, but not usually with TCM. And at the same time, we can be treating underlying what we call internal organ patterns or pathologies. So, if someone might have like a sore, let's say, upper back rhomboids, occiput. This is a really common area for what we call liver chi stagnation. So any type of emotional stress. It can be related to how you sit at your work. If you're stressed at work, it's extremely common to have upper back tension.
Mm-hmm.
So not only can we treat that area locally, but then we'll address treating the liver with liver channel points, helping just to make sure that there's free flow of the blood and circulation all over the body. We're going to reduce your stress, help that internal organ, and treat the musculoskeletal issue, where that whole theory and sort of like years, like we have to be in school for 3 to 5 years to learn this theory, whereas IMS is kind of like I believe it's a 300-hour course where I believe 200 of or approximately 200 of those hours are done in like an educational setting, and then it's self-taught the remainder of them. And then we have it's a 1900 hour to 2200 hour school course, 550 hours minimum in a clinical setting where you're doing the technique. So I think if someone's going to try acupuncture for the first time, why not go to a registered acupuncturist that's just far more specialized? And again, nothing against IMS. I actually use motor point acupuncture, which is similar to IMS, in my practice a lot in conjunction with TCM therapy because it is so effective. So I have nothing against it. I just think there's more theory, and you can treat the whole person with TCM style acupuncture. There's also like Korean, Japanese style acupuncture that's very effective too, and even more gentle, which some people need more than this like crazy stimulation just to relieve like a tight muscle. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to have a lot of the theory behind it too. Like I think that the philosophy behind that Eastern tradition and medicine really ties everything together.
Totally. And what I love too is there's how I would approach and how we're taught to approach, like, let's say pain and injury for athletes, can be a huge emotional component to even, like for your example, if you were coming into me, you were off playing pro volleyball somewhere, and was it your Achilles that you ruptured?
Yeah, I've done both of them. I have some mad PTSD.
Well, that's what I mean. So we even have to, what we call is assessing the Shen. This always happens in a Chinese medicine or a TCM acupuncture appointment. We're actually looking at the patient. Is there like a glowing light in their eyes? How is their complexion? How is their mood? How are their emotions? Especially with injuries. Usually there's a cycle associated with athletes. At first, there might be resentment or anger. Then you kind of flow through like grief, sadness, especially if you can't return to the activity or the sport you did. If the injury was bad enough, you might have to like change your route or trajectory with what you were doing. So always taking that into account while treating the injury. And then again, is there an underlying deficiency that we need to address with diet, acupuncture, maybe some herbs if you have Chinese medicine certification to be able to prescribe them. For instance, let me give you an example of this. So in Chinese medicine, the spleen and stomach, they're sort of in charge of digestion, and they are in charge of making sure the muscles are fully functioning, are strong. So if people feel like their limbs are really heavy and their muscles are really weak, we always look at the spleen and stomach and see how they're doing. Mm-hmm. And then the kidneys are responsible for the bones and the marrow. So if someone has osteoarthritis or some type of bone-related issue that shouldn't be happening at their age, that isn't quite normal, well, let's address the kidneys and make sure we're supporting the kidneys. And then when it comes to ligaments and tendons, in your case, or any type of ligament tendon issue, that is governed by the liver in Chinese medicine. So we wouldn't only be treating the injury, but we'd also be supporting your liver, suggesting dietary advice to support your liver so that it can better control and nourish the tendons and the ligaments, especially in the healing and the rehab process.
So essentially I should drink less.
Not only that, liver is responsible for storing the blood too. So we'd be like, is there some type of is there enough nutrients in the blood? Is it nourished enough? Is the patient, are there a lot of dry symptoms like dry skin, dry hair, dry nails? Do we need to be more nourished that way so the joints and the ligaments are more lubricated and better hydrated for their function? Mm-hmm.
Very cool. What is the, so you mentioned Shen, and what is that? What is the,
Shen is
what
like
is that mechanism?
Yeah, it's like your spirit. It's a combination of your cognitive functioning, your emotions, and it's basically how your spirit manifests through you. So for instance, if someone's really, really, really sick, let's say, like they're just super weak, you know, you look at them and it's almost like they're not there.
Mhm.
Or if someone's really, really tired, like this is all stuff we look for. And then on the face, we look for luster, shine. Is there any color to the face? Are they really pale? Uh, if your shen's really good and functioning, like you're there, you're focused, you're able to think clearly, your judgment isn't clouded, your reality matches like your thoughts. There's no sort of like deception there. So that is the shen, and it can get
Mhm.
disturbed is sort of the loose word they translate by many things. If there's dampness in the body that's accumulated through our diet and maybe not moving enough, because if there's not enough circulation of the qi in blood, it stagnates, and then that can develop dampness and phlegm. And then you get signs and symptoms associated with that. But one of them is like a foggy brain. And I think we can relate to this. We've all had that at some point in our life where it just feels like you can't think clearly,
Mhm.
and your head feels kind of heavy. Same with the limbs. There's that dampness again. So we can sort of see that, and we're assessing for that as TCM practitioners in the consultation. Like, how is their Shen doing? Yeah,
Very
I
cool.
hope I hope that makes sense. I'm kind of like just regurgitating all this stuff that's in my head as you ask the questions, and I'm hoping it's making some sense.
No, it's perfect. Yeah, totally. I
Okay,
think that it lines up with a lot of the Eastern stuff that I've personally looked at. So I think
cool.
it's very, very cool. It's cool that
Mhm.
there's so many different components to it. I know that in TCM there's like food therapy and there's cupping and acupuncture, and there's so many different ways to look at an individual and really tailor a treatment plan toward that individual rather than just kind of the classic you're getting this because everyone gets this. It's definitely not as cookie cutter. It's really customized.
Totally. Like if two people came in with an ankle injury, I might use like similar points locally with the ankle, but I'd be using different points to like treat them holistically after we've done an initial consult to see what they each need. Yeah.
There's even I know that there's I was fortunate enough by us our conversation being delayed that I was able to read a bunch of like articles on this, and there's a
Oh,
doctor out
cool.
of yeah there's a doctor out of Harvard that's on he's a neurologist, but his name's Dr. Quima, and he studies acupuncture and is putting together kind of a neural map of how everything works, and he's looking at the inflammatory response and an anti-inflammatory response, and how like getting a needle in one place will reduce an inflammatory response in one place and maybe increase it somewhere else. You're always looking to kind of bring about that homeostatic rebound into kind of you'd say readjusting yourself to kind of where you're meant to be.
Hell yeah. There's a lot of neuroscience backing it up now, which is so cool.
Hmm.
Acupuncture has an amazing effect on the central nervous system. So there's studies that say after 20 minutes of having acupuncture needles in, there's this trigger of release of neurotransmitters, like the feel good hormones of serotonin, dopamine, endorphins, so the natural painkillers. So that's why people generally feel like, oh, at the very least, after an acupuncture appointment, they just feel good and they usually get a really good sleep that night.
Hmm.
But yeah, it has a wonderful effect on the central nervous system, and especially with inflammation. And it can interrupt pain signals, especially with cupping and gua sha and even electrical acupuncture, e-stim.
Hmm.
There's a lot of support behind that for like chronic pain, neuropathy, and stuff like that. Mm-hmm.
So is e-stem essentially acupuncture along with a TENS kind of machine, or what's the?
I don't think they go as strong as TENS machines, but basically you put the two acupuncture points in and then you connect them with like, they look like tiny little car jacks, like little clamps, and
Yeah.
there's a positive and negative charge. And then we actually have this machine that controls the amplitude between them. So it can either be like the patterns of how the electricity flows through. So it might be a dense dispersed wave or a continuous wave, meaning it's a constant stimulation. And we use that for some conditions, or we use like a patterned not position, current,
Hmm.
a pattern current for other conditions. And the intensity is just basically how fast that electric current goes between the 2 points that you've connected. So that can be really good for, again, numbness, tingling, nerve pain. If muscles aren't being used enough, let's say like, I don't know, if after I've used it once after a hip replacement, the lateral, like the hip abductors were pretty weak.
Hmm.
You know, they get cut through there. So glute med, glute min, piriformis just weren't firing quite properly. So we put those points in, making sure the patient has sensation there, because you wouldn't want to put e-stim on someone who has numbness in an area.
Hmm.
And then doing acupuncture, connecting the points. And then by doing that, you're basically increasing, okay, this is cool. You're basically increasing proprioception. So by putting acupuncture points in a muscle, and then you can also put points in where the nerve roots actually exit the spine. So let's say, same example, it's the hip replacement and we're working on the glute muscles. I'm also going to put a couple points along the spinal column. They're called Huato Jiaji points. They're traditional points. They're considered extra points. Huato Jiaji was a man who figured out that if you put in points just about half an inch lateral to the lower border of the spinous process of different vertebrae associated to where those dermatomes go, or where those nerves innervate different internal organs or limbs, you can have a really special effect on that area. So let's go back to that example where it's a hip replacement. We're trying to fire the glutes. I'm putting needles in the glutes. Could add some e-stim, don't have to. And then I'm also going to connect L3 to L5. Those are the lumbar vertebra, Huato Jiaji points, as well as those glute points. And then we're going to create that proprioception, that communication that's been disrupted from scar tissue and that surgical trauma, to really try to emphasize complete healing, so that the nerve signals from the spinal root can flow the way that they did before, and hopefully have a speedy recovery with just healthier tissue, because there's going to be more blood circulation, qi, and that information and communication line is being restored. I love using that for injuries, especially recurring injuries like ankle rolls. When you like keep rolling your ankle all the time, let's try and increase the proprioception with the acupuncture needles that are stimulating the tissue at the area of the injury, and then where it enters and exits the spinal cord with its nerve root. I hope that made sense, but it's so cool.
So cool. In my experience, I've been like with an Achilles rupture, and having done it twice, you have to learn how to walk again, but it's not necessarily the atrophy of the muscle that's responsible, but it's also the atrophy of the neural pathways and the kind of reflexes in your spine. So I think that's a really cool way of addressing and working on that association between the muscle itself and the neural pathways that make that a habit, like make that movement of, for me, stepping up on my toe, that a habit. I think I'm strong enough to do it now, but now it's just a neural thing of I have to do it constantly. I have to think about it constantly. And even on the foot that I did 2 years ago, I still have to think about it sometimes, of having a full bridge. And so I think that's a really, really cool kind of combination. And I haven't been able to find literature. I would love it if someone is listening and they could send me literature on the relationship between the neural atrophy and the muscular atrophy, and kind of how those are related, and the
because if the signals aren't coming from the brain and the spinal cord to the tissue, it's exactly what you said. It reduces. Its stimulus isn't as automatic as it used to be, and then you have to recreate. So you definitely have to do like the initiation from the brain that you're doing. But I do think if you incorporated this type of acupuncture into your rehab program, it would probably speed it up. I mean, I can't claim anything. But it'd be interesting. It'd be very interesting to see. And actually in America, there's a program called SMAC, Sport Medicine Acupuncture Program. And that's a special designation. And you can actually go on their website and search who has SMAC designations in the States. And there's a few in Canada as well, but this education is only offered in the States. And they do that particular type of acupuncture. So if you ever wanted to incorporate it, there might actually be some sports medicine acupuncturists in Phoenix that you can try.
Very, very cool.
Yeah.
Well, that's super interesting. I might have to look into that.
Yeah, and then again, with the Huato Jiaji points, there's that example of like something that they knew thousands of years ago. Hey, special influence on the lower body with like the L3 to L5 or S1 dorsal nerve roots, but they called them Huato Jiaji points. And now, like future, it's all like the same, and it's so fascinating that they knew this. Like they were like kind of like frontiers of science back then. Like they created gunpowder, They created so much. It's just, I think it's hard to communicate sometimes because the terminology with Chinese medicine, when it initially started, the only way they had to describe what was happening, because medicine wasn't a thing, they described it in relationship to nature. So that's why we have, like, the liver is the wood element, because it has the nature and the characteristics of what wood also has. So they're like, oh, what we're finding is kind of like what we see in nature here. And this is how they passed it down, like through literature and storytelling and metaphors and beautiful, like, poetic metaphors of how everything worked in relationship to nature, which I think is amazing. But I think maybe that's where there's that gap between communicating to other health practitioners in medicine. So it's our job as TCM practitioners to be able to communicate in a way that's understandable, but at the same time, like, be confident that there is merit and it's effective. Yeah.
I think that the scientific current lingo, the current vernacular, it's very, very technical. And so I've found a lot of use in relating things back to, like, foundationally naturalistic things. So I did a lecture a few weeks ago, and the whole thing is kind of about relating the growth of consciousness to a tree and a tree's root systems. So we kind of have the conscious mind, that's the canopy, and then all of the resources and rain and such is supposed to dribble off the outskirts of the canopy and keep under it dry, and that's meant to force the root system to grow outwards. So I think that using metaphors like that can allow people, I think it's much more accessible to people, rather than, like, a lot of the scientific vernacular it's so technical because we're finding out so much about it. And so I think that that's kind of where we're at now in terms of the bridge between Eastern and Western medicine, is that we're finding the bridge and how to explain things, because, as you've said, these are tried and true methods over thousands of years, and China was the leading science. Like, they had so much technology, and, like, the ships that they had, I think I want to say it was like 500 years before Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas, air quotes.
Mm-hmm.
The Chinese took an even larger giant route around the entire world, and they found all of these areas, and they just decided not to continue with exploring them. They didn't colonize them because it was kind of an elitist thing that anyone outside of China was a savage. And it was the same thing when they went to, like, Cambodia and saw Angkor Wat. They write about how all of these Cambodians were savages, even though they had developed one of the greatest architectural monuments of all time. But yeah, so I think that now we're kind of in this state where we're bridging the gap between the language of Eastern tradition and the language of Western tradition, and finding that Eastern tradition works just as well, if not better, than lots of the Western medicine that we're currently using.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they complement each other so well.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, I would never advocate against Western medicine at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm never going to convince a patient to go off pharmaceutical medication that they require, or mental health medication that they require, ever. But acupuncture and Chinese medicine can be such a complementary adjunct therapy to maybe manage any unwanted side effects, or even often, like, reducing the need to have certain medications. But again, if someone needs a medication, I would never, ever be trying to convince someone to go off of them. And what I find interesting too, at least in British Columbia, there's this modernization of everyone's scope of practice for health practitioners across the board. And, there's other health practitioners doing acupuncture, like in regards to IMS style. And now acupuncture, like in our education, we learn a lot of, there's like orthopedic acupuncture, which is like manual muscle testing, a little bit of exercise prescription, and orthopedic assessments and stuff like that. So we all are starting to sort of mesh our practices together. And at all the different colleges of different manual therapists are trying to keep increasing their scope to include more, because what we're learning is manual therapy alone just isn't enough, or our tiny little scope of practice isn't enough. We need to be able to provide more for patients for long-term success and care. And I guess, like, current research is now saying that for chronic pain, at least, let's just talk about pain. manual therapy isn't that successful for long-term cures across the board.
Mhm.
I think that's more so for the research has been done more so on like massage, chiro, physio, and stuff like that. I don't think acupuncture has been included because we're still a little bit behind, or just not accepted. But I think we would be included in there as manual therapists because we do the cupping, the gua sha. So great, sort of like short-term immediate results. But what they're finding is there's these other pillars that need to be included in treatment, which is like for chronic pain patients, it's mental health care. There's a lot of mental health issues associated with chronic pain when it's really affecting your quality of life. There's usually multiple morbidities going on. So meaning like they might have diabetes as well, or there might be multiple sites of the chronic pain. So there's dealing with the other associated issues, and then there's all the other contributing factors like socioeconomic factors, relationships at home, self-esteem, like previous mood disorders. Like we can't just have someone come in and get treatment and expect them to get better. They have to get moving, and all these other aspects of their life need to be taken into account. So I think there's going to be a big shift, hopefully, moving forward, where health practitioners are just communicating that there's more you need to do outside of treatment, the treatments itself,
Mhm.
and other things need to get addressed. It's very interesting.
Yeah, like you said, there's so much complementary medicine that there's so many complementary effects that medicine has towards each other.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we all just need to get on the same page and work together,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
we do.
exactly.
I think which we do for the most part.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You mentioned cupping. I know that for athletics, that's like a huge craze is cupping.
Yeah. Trendy.
Yeah.
It's awesome. I did a big like explanation on cupping on my Instagram page recently of sort of like the more science explanation of it. But it's been used in acupuncture forever.
Hmm.
Uh, and it's awesome. It's very effective.
What is the well, I want to know the science and I want to know the philosophy. Like I want to know both sides of it.
So in Chinese medicine and acupuncture, we can use it to, yes, move what we call qi or blood stagnation, which usually results in pain and muscular tension. But it can also be used to remove external pathogenic factors. So let's say an example of that would be, when you're just this, not talking COVID, but when you're about to get the common cold, a very common symptom of that is you get whole body aches and pains, and usually along like your back
Hmm.
and the nape of the neck and stuff. It's just general muscle aches, and you're like, uh-oh, like I'm about to get sick. So if you're in that stage of the disease where it's not fully in its full manifestation, you're getting aches and pains, alternating chills and fever, shivers and stuff like that, you can actually put a cup or multiple cups on the upper back, on points that relate to the lung channel, and also the channel that we call the du mai. It's the most yang of all the channels, to try and suck that pathogen out of the exterior sort of level of the body before it penetrates deeper and sort of progresses into more of a serious disease. That's when you, like, let's say it gets into the lungs and then you're coughing up a lot of phlegm, or you get a really serious fever. You're basically trying to pull it out before it gets to that point. And it
Hmm.
can also have an influence on the digestive system as well. On the Western side of things, it talks about sort of what's happening. So when you add this negative pressure by sucking the skin into the cup, at a microscopic level, the venules, which are the smallest blood capillaries, burst. And that's when you get the red markings on the skin, the red petechiae. And if you have hard enough negative pressure, you're going to have like the big dark purple bruises. It doesn't matter whether you get the red spots to the purple bruises, the exact same mechanism is happening. So you don't necessarily have to get these big crazy cupping marks to get the therapeutic response that you want. So what's happening is once those blood vessels burst, histamine gets released from the cells, and histamine is an inflammatory marker. And once that goes into the bloodstream, white blood cells flood to the area that's been damaged, new red blood cells do, then there's angiogenesis, so the formation of new blood vessels to basically repair the ones that have burst. The lymphatic system gets affected with cupping too, because you're sort of pulling the lymphatic cells apart, and then more fluid can get rushed to the area. So basically what you're doing is creating like a micro trauma in order to sort of trigger a healing cascade. So the redness, the heat that is a result of cupping, again, that's from the histamine that gets released, and it's good inflammation. It's temporary. And that's usually why it doesn't hurt either. Like after you get cupping done, the marks shouldn't hurt. If they do hurt, it's probably just done at too hard of a pressure. So anyways, once that whole sort of cascade happens, basically what you want to do is encourage the patient to drink a ton of water to help the body excrete and sort of flush out all the metabolites or the damaged cell tissue that's been created. And then the result is like new generated like blood vessels, more blood circulation, more oxygenated and lubricated tissue that's more hydrated. So it should be more functional. So if there was tension and pain or like fascial adhesions there before, ultimately the goal is to sort of reduce the adhesions and the stuckness so that everything's articulating a little bit better at that like microscopic level. Mm-hmm. Hope that made sense.
Yeah, it's super cool. I think there's an interesting craze of anti-inflammatory, and I think that it's worth noting that inflammation isn't necessarily a negative thing. It depends on
it's an amazing, it's an amazing mechanism that the body has to heal, and it has to happen. And usually histamine is associated with like, oh my gosh, a bad allergic response or something. But anytime there's inflammation, histamine will be there, and that's why you get the swelling and the redness, and so necessary with acute injury at first. The issue is if it's prolonged and it's chronic, and then it can wreak havoc. And again, I have to say that my understanding is very limited. Like I have an undergrad in, sport health and physical education with anatomy and biomechanics and biology and stuff. So I can really only, I have limited knowledge as to like really what this breaks down to, and what I've been talking from is just from like a professional development course and a couple so, someone who has more of a education with this might argue, but I do know that inflammation has its a very healthy purpose, and it's necessary. Same with fevers. Fevers are actually the body's natural way to fight off a bacteria before it penetrates and becomes like a serious disease. Mm-hmm. They can be dangerous and life-threatening, but it is okay to let a fever run its course in order to like stave off disease, and that's strengthening your body's immune system, especially from a Chinese medicine perspective. Like we either want to encourage the person to sweat out a disease and therefore like are accepting the fever, or sweating's a big one to try and get pathogenic factors out.
Yeah, I know there's a breathing method called Tummo, Tummo, and that's kind of the Wim Hof kind of does it. It's the Wim Hof method kind of thing. And so it actually originated in, I believe it was Tibet or Nepal. It was one of those. I think it was Tibet, but I could be wrong. And so the whole idea is that you want to kind of cause that inflammation in your body by arousing your body so much, by breathing in so deeply and heavily. And so it's just this constant, and you want to hyperventilate. You want to simulate hyperventilation so that you're arousing your autonomic nervous system, and then that comes in and fights off any infection by kind of increasing inflammation. And so like I do that I practice that a lot actually with after my Achilles, because I had it surgically repaired, and so there's always this risk for infection. So every few days I would just try to play it safe and do some Tummo breathing to try to.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd imagine that like probably simulates the sympathetic nervous system too, almost like that fight or flight when everything gets heightened. Cool.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to pick your brain about something that it's kind of on that bridge of Eastern and Western medicine, and that I can't explain it and I don't understand it, but in my experience, it's been something that's helped me. And when I was in India, I got my sound therapy certification along with my Reiki, but I found sound certification super useful and then I went to Tibet and found some bowls. And so with every morning that I'd wake up with my Achilles, I would have to warm it up for like 20 minutes. It would take a long time to kind of get warm and kind of get into a place where I felt like I could walk normally. And then I was playing around with my sound bowls one day and put one onto my Achilles and played it, and never again had that experience of having to warm it up. And I think,
Whoa.
it's so insane. And now I have a lot of the bowls are like, they're all of the frequencies are related to chakra frequencies.
Yeah.
And so I have one for each chakra. I have multiple for each chakra, and like I'll play them at different parts of my body and use them for meditation, and kind of use them as a sound to kind of. So this one that I have is Om, the third eye chakra, and so it's 432. But I just have that all the time. Like I don't travel without it, because anytime that I start to feel a sore shoulder or something, I'll put it on and play it, and it normally gets better quite quickly. And I think that it might be kind of similar to that disturbing the fascia and kind of recirculating blood. And I'd love to know what you think about that.
That's so cool. And maybe even similar to, if I think about like Easton, like you're basically creating a currency or some type of constant stimulation into the tissue that's different that the body's used to feeling. And therefore you're interrupting pain signals that are getting sent to the brain, or I don't know. So when you use it, do you put the bowl on the actual body part and then hit it, and then you let like the reverberations go through the tissue?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, like I'll put it. So from being on crutches, I'm so pulled forward, so I have to do lots of back exercises, and I'm really conscious of my posture now. And so, but I think my old physio thinks that I broke this collarbone as a young child because it's protruding and not flexible. And so, yeah, and it's also my hitting shoulder. So
yeah,
just cascading events. And so, so it's always tight. And so I'll occasionally put the bowl onto my chest area, and then I'll play it. And that tends to help.
Yeah. That's an awesome spot to put it. Pec minor, pec major.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's so cool. I know there's acupuncturists that use tuning forks in conjunction with acupuncture too, which is interesting. So probably very similar to what you're doing, but I'm not trained or educated to really speak on that. But I do remember, it's interesting how you said you have that one bowl that you bring with you, because when I was in India too, and we were like taught to buy the bowls if we want to. And yeah, we were just sort of told to try out as many as we wanted and get the one that actually makes you feel good. Like what one is your tone that makes you feel so good. So that must be the one for you right now.
Yeah, it was I definitely felt a connection to it. And I spent a very long time finding the set that I found.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's so cool that you tried that though, and it worked for, like, I'm not surprised at all that it worked. I think that's so neat, because something has to be penetrating into the tissue and changing something, or at least changing the communication between maybe nociceptors, like the pain stimulus nerves, to the brain. Interesting.
Right. And yeah, I'm like, for me personally, it was such a strange experience, because I would say I really like evidence. I really like to kind of understand mechanisms, and not only the philosophy behind it, but kind of what are the cognitive mechanisms at play and the physiological mechanisms at play. And so this is something that just like I love it, but it irks me in a weird way, because I'm like, I want to know what the mechanism is. I want to know why this works, because clearly for me it works, and whether that be placebo. And I don't necessarily think it is a placebo, because that's kind of, I guess, what a placebo would be, is that you think it works, even though it maybe it's working at a cognitive level, not necessarily a physiological level. But this is something that I haven't found a significant amount of research for, and I just find it so cool. And I think that it really can. I think that it'll slowly make its way into kind of like you said, the conjunction of Western and Eastern medicine, and kind of complementary medicine. Because I've even done it with friends before, where I'll have a friend over and just do a big sound bath. And that's a really good way for people to kind of get into a meditative state, and super relaxed. You sleep great. And so I'd love to know the mechanisms at play there.
It almost seems like more of a somatic type of healing, where it is like more physiological sort of symptom related. And I do find that sometimes that healing can be so powerful, where really communication and speaking isn't involved, and it's more of like feelings and sensations are being shifted and changed.
Hmm.
Um, and sound has the ability to do that. And it's so powerful.
I've had unbelievable experiences by doing sound therapy. Like I've had people cry. I've had
Yeah.
people do really interesting twitching and muscle movements. And yeah, like I said, it's unexplainable to me at this point. But the the tangible evidence that I have is just the experiences and the anecdotes that
Mhm.
I've received from it. So
Yeah,
it's
that's
very
always
cool.
frustrating because it's always amazing to have evidence. We all want it to like
Hmm.
prove that like, I swear this, I swear this works.
Double blind clinical trial. It's there. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. You just need a
Hmm.
lot of money and a lot of
Yeah.
resources. Maybe one day there'll be, hopefully one day there'll be something to support that for sure. Or maybe not support it, but at least the research maybe is done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I remember this story from when you were from like way back when, but you were in India and you had a knee injury
Oh yeah.
and someone like instantly diagnosed you. What
Yes,
happened with
that was
that?
a Reiki practitioner. So after my now husband and I, we hiked the Annapurna circuit, and after playing, like when I played volleyball, I remember the last couple of years, I had sort of like nagging, persistent knee issues. They never really could diagnose what it was. I got Graston down on it a lot, just a lot of manual soft tissue therapy from a chiro, and um, I did no stretching, so I know that has. There was no prehab rehab at the college I was at until much later. After a few national championships, they finally started integrating it a bit more for the athletes. But I think that had a lot to do with it. But anyways, I never, if I wasn't playing and jumping all the time, it didn't really bother me. So the Annapurna circuit was my first multi-day trek. I think to date, it was probably the hardest physical thing I've ever done in my life.
Hmm.
Um, and I remember my knees were just so edemic, like they were like jello pockets. You could see it, like you'd poke your finger in the skin and there'd be like a dent there. They were not happy. I thought my patellas were gonna like shoot out of my knees, but in particular, the left one was the worst. Um, and anyways, after we did this trek, we went to Pokhara and we were kind of just hanging out there, and we decided to do this yoga retreat, which we ended up leaving after 3 days because we were young and we didn't like the strict regimen. That was almost uh, like a cleanse sort of detox. You have to do an hour no talking meditative walk in the morning, 2 little sort of guided yoga practices by the man, and then you live with his family and you only got to eat 2 meals a day that were vegetarian and very clean, and they cooked the food there. It was amazing. And their daughters were there. We got really close with their daughters that were much younger than us. They were like in middle school. And it was lovely, but because we had just finished that hike, we were basically starving. We had lost so much weight,
Hmm.
and we just wanted to like have beer and stuff because food is quite limited on it. We couldn't drink and we could only eat 2 meals a day. Like I was sneaking out, going to Pokhara, like getting snacks on free time and not telling even my boyfriend. I was like, yeah, I just went for a walk. But anyways, you could also add to do little like treatments with the yoga guru that ran it. And he was a level 3 Reiki master. So I was like, oh, I know Reiki. I love Reiki. I'll do one of those. So yeah, I just fell asleep on the Reiki table, and it felt like I had been plugged into like an electric socket. Like I was buzzing when I woke up. It was so cool, and I was very relaxed. And as soon as I woke up, he woke me up and it was done. I don't know how long I fell asleep for. And again, this memory is kind of vague. This was in 2012. But I woke up and he was like, I had to stop on your left knee, and I was there for so long. There was a complete energy blockage there. And I was like, what? Because I didn't tell him about my knee. I didn't tell him there was an issue. At that time, the swelling had gone down. It was like a week after the hike. And yeah, he knew, and he spent so much time there, which was so interesting because yeah, I've had issues with that knee forever. I still do. If I do multi-day hikes, it's the first thing that flares up. But if I'm not doing certain movements, I never feel it. It's so interesting. So how he could identify that, I have no idea. But
So
Reiki is
crazy.
amazing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You got your
Mhm.
certification?
I did my level 1 like attunement way back when I was in college, and I haven't been actively practicing it. If anything, it'd be cool to get into, but I'm sort of learning to navigate that introspective uh, sort of energy awareness with acupuncture, and like qigong and tai chi are some practices that were part of our education that we learned to sort of like establish energetic boundaries and also be able to nourish yourself in between patients, and like modulate and regulate your shit so that you're not putting your stuff on other people or taking theirs on, because you know you can deal with some pretty heavy stuff
Mm-hmm.
in treatment. So I think there's like overlap between those things. So maybe one day I'll maybe work on my level 2, or maybe I probably want to get my level 1 again, honestly, to like tune it up a bit. But yeah, how about you? How like what did you get up to with your certs?
Well, I was in Rishikesh in
Yeah.
the foothills of the Himalayas, and I I was there for sound therapy because I had learned to do it a little bit from this guy that I ran a hostel with in Vietnam, and he kind of told me like you have to go to India to learn sound therapy because it's tough to find people that actually know what they're doing outside of India. I was
Mm-hmm.
supposed to go to Korea to play volleyball. The coach of the team I was going to go play with got fired, so I kind of just had a month gap, and then
Yeah.
I took a flight over to India and did my sound therapy. I just lined up that they had a spot opened, and so I did my sound therapy, and then I was there for like I had my whole second half of the day after my initial class. So I did sound therapy and then Reiki. So I got my level 2 certification for so I can practice both of those for both Reiki and sound therapy. So that was a lot of fun and very cool. I think I actually might have gotten my level 3 in Reiki. Um, and then after that, I went and did a Vipassana meditation retreat. So
Nice.
that was very cool.
That's a silent meditation retreat, right?
Yeah, that's the 10-day thing.
Wow.
Yeah,
How was that?
interesting.
Yeah.
Very very interesting. Same thing. You're meditating for 14 hours a day. I think I probably got up to 16 because there's literally nothing to do. Like you just have
Mm.
this tiny dorm and you're by yourself, can't speak to anyone, can't read, can't write. You're by yourself and you only sleep for 4 6 hours because you're meditating all day. So I think that it kind of reduces the necessity for that sleep. And then yeah, you're fasting, so you're eating 2 meals a day, and you have a like 4 hour eating window. And yeah, I think I probably lost 10 to 15 pounds of like I had been working out the whole summer. I'd been working out the whole year, the whole summer, kind of trying to come back from my Achilles and getting ready to rehab, and I was in really good shape. I went in and just lost everything.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
But I've heard it's pretty amazing for just dealing with your stuff, dealing with your shadow work.
yeah,
Um, yeah, like just being forced to sit with your little demons and
hmm
the voices, and also learn to be your best friend and your biggest supporter. And yeah, silence
yeah,
is silence is a seriously powerful practice.
yeah. I could.
Yeah.
There's just so much clutter, I think, in people's minds that you don't realize until you're really with yourself. I could rewatch TV shows in my head. I There were songs that I knew every word to songs and every tone that I didn't even remember ever hearing. Like
Wow.
they weren't my favorite songs by any means, but
Oh, you mean like that was flashing up, like that you were just like
oh, all the
were.
time. Yeah, it
Oh,
wouldn't stop.
cool.
And
Interesting.
like I went through all of Game of Thrones, all of Rick and Morty, like episode by episode, like at an accelerated rate. But like I could see everything, I could hear everything. Yeah, it was very interesting. The
Hmm.
personal conflicts and such. It was it's so strange because it's interesting to talk about because and it's kind of something that they advise there is that don't really tell people about your experience in here because then people come in with this expectation that they're gonna have this spiritual awakening or they're going
Right.
to pull themselves up and it's so I think I've only told maybe one or two people kind of the really deep down stuff that happened in there, and that's mostly I've told those people just so that I don't feel crazy by having those like only to myself.
Yeah.
Um, because I need people like other people to know so that they can kind of be like, whoa, that's cool, rather than me just constantly being like thinking about whether that actually happened or not.
Mm, mm.
Yeah, there were days where I like only spoke Spanish to myself. Like my entire inner dialogue was only Spanish, and It
Wow.
stopped being English. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a very cool experience. Yeah, I cried a lot.
Yeah.
Not that I don't like. I think I cried relatively easily, but yeah,
That's good.
cried a decent amount in there. Yeah, it is
Ballad
good.
it out.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's just it's an emotion. You have to feel it. It's something that you feel when you're overwhelmed, I think, and so being
Mhm.
able to let that out, kind of re-regulate yourself, brings you back to that homeostasis.
Totally. And even just speaking about emotions and how you said even with sound therapy before that people have cried, the same thing can happen in acupuncture. Like out of nowhere, I've had people burst into like crazy laughter out of nowhere. I've had people burst into tears, sobbing, and they don't even know where it's from, but it's almost like that animalistic instinctual response where, you know, like sometimes animals after they're in like a fight or flight state, if they survive like a predator after them or whatever, they'll literally just stop and shake it off and
Hmm.
move on. I think when you have practices that really change the energetic field, and I'm not talking about energy as like woo, but like we run on energy. Our heart beats on this electrical pulse. There's electricity current flowing through our body constantly. If it wasn't, we would die. And you know, we're, what is it, like almost 80% water. That's a conductor of electricity. So when throw an acupuncture needle in there that's metal, you're going to really like shift the way everything's flowing. And what are emotions? It's just energy in the body. And if you don't let it out, it gets stored. So sometimes I think these frequencies, whether it's sound or a metal needle, sort of changing that electrical current, if there's something that hasn't been left out and it gets stirred up and you're not ready for it, it can just sort of manifest and
Hmm.
purge right out.
Yeah.
Um, and all it is it's energy. That's why sometimes I did this course. Have you heard of Commune? It's like this free online healing thing. I don't know. You can pay for a membership, and I tried one of their free courses just to see what it's about. And this practitioner was teaching about anxiety, and I thought it was really cool because she was saying how anxiety often there's just like this excess internal energy, and then if it gets super overwhelming, and sometimes if possible, if not to that point of like going into full like attack mode, you can actually use that energy and do something productive with it. So if you are someone who has a bit higher energy and are more prone to emotions like anxiousness and anxiety, well, then you can like funnel that extra energy into areas of productivity. Or if you feel that extra energy coming up, know that you need to move and you might be able to manage that energy a little bit more. Because if you don't, it's just going to get stored and sort of like compound on itself, and then it's not manageable.
Hmm.
And I thought that was very interesting because again, it's just talking about how emotions are energy.
That's another cool thing that I liked about one of the posts on your page where you talk about food therapy, and kind of there's this the idea that like, if you're a very kind of anxious, angry person, to not eat spicy food and to
Mm,
not eat hot food. And if you're someone that's generally of lower affect and maybe depressed, then to start eating warm food more, to kind of try to channel that homeostatic rebound.
yeah, so you can sort of change your diet and what you eat. In Chinese medicine, a lot has to do with like the seasons, which physiological function you're trying to support or change, and also you can eat for the mood too. And there's tie over a little bit too with Ayurvedic medicine. So you know, figuring out your dosha, and if you're Pitta or fire, then yeah, you need to
Hmm.
eat all those spicy, caffeine, alcohol, all those things in moderation because it's basically like adding fuel to the fire.
Hmm.
Um, I'm a Pitta. I love all the uppers, the exciting things,
Hmm.
all the big flavors. But I do find that I get overstimulated if I have it. Like if I have spicy food, I just sweat instantly. And some people can have spicy food and like, it's so warm, I love it. And I'm like, I'm so uncomfortable. So yeah, it's like learning that self-awareness so that you can just be in that homeostatic, harmonized state. And then because if you aren't, then that's when it starts affecting your mood too. Like if you're constantly eating something that your body gets triggered by or is sensitive to, or it causes inflammation or it causes discomfort and pain, that's eventually, if you're doing that chronically, it's going to have an impact on your emotions and your sleep and energy
Mm-hmm.
levels. And because you're constantly draining your energy by causing this reaction to something your body doesn't really necessarily agree with. And we're not taught to do that in our Western culture. We're taught that like more is more and eat everything you want and, you know, have all the foods. Whereas in other cultures, it's, yeah, you change as you age, you change with the seasons. There's food prep and how you eat things there's method to it. That's why, like, you know, sauerkraut with like bangers and mash from the European sort of side. And then like that helps you digest it. And then let's think of sushi. There's this ginger and wasabi and sesame seeds, all these things, and the soy sauce, obviously, those are all part of the meal strategically to help you digest it in a better way. And if any of those components are removed, it doesn't digest as easily, which I think is so cool about traditional food culture and how it's
Mm-hmm.
prepared.
Yeah, I think one of the cool things about all of these up and coming different areas of expertise and like science and like health medicine is that we're able to optimize a lot better. The more that we know about like sleep, the more that we can optimize our anxiety levels. And there are all of these different, like so many different areas that are connected in different ways at different places that, like, once you kind of figured, I've met people that have kind of slowly figured everything out. And once you have everything figured out and you're able to optimize, people are just like, it seems like people are bulletproof.
Bulletproof is a thing too.
Bulletproof coffee. Yeah. Yak butter.
Yeah. Yeah, you just got to find out what works for you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just tell my patients, you know, you can go down a rabbit hole with diet and recommendations and things you can find online. And it's all about like what genuinely makes your body feel okay and like it's functioning its best, and stick to those things. And as you change, those things will change. Like
Mm-hmm.
nothing, you can't stick to the same thing for chronically for too long. Like you got to adapt with how things change and how your life circumstances change.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to keep you for too long, but do you have a few more minutes? I want to talk about menstrual pain and acupuncture.
Okay, sure.
Do you have time for that?
Yep, let's do it.
Killer. So because I read one of your posts where you talk about kind of the Western way of treating it, and you're taking pain medication,
Mm-hmm.
and the acupuncture method is trying to assess that pain and to find a different means to address that, right?
Yeah. So what I thought was interesting, and here's my own experience, and you can't just because I'm a Canadian, like a white Canadian girl, doesn't mean my experience is the rest as everyone else's,
Mm-hmm.
because we all come from very different family dynamics and cultural backgrounds. But you know, the period was seen as just something that was a bit of a nuisance. No one really talked about it. You know, if you have pain, take a bunch of Advil. Or if you have any issues, the best thing to do is to go on birth control right away, which is what I did, because that's what my sister did. She had very like crippling cramps.
Mm-hmm.
And that was sort of the answer back then. There was no other methods to explore. First of all, I'm not against birth control at all. Everyone has the right to choose whether or not they want to have children, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And if birth control helps you with your menstrual issues and you're happy with that, then it's totally fine. What I was surprised to learn when I was in school for Chinese medicine is that in China, and in this medical theory, the menstruation is considered basically a vital sign. It's almost as important as your pulse. Like, they're always asking, we will always ask about a menstruating female's menstrual cycle. What's the quality of the blood? How long do you bleed? What's the amount? Because those signs and symptoms tell us all different information about the person, and it's like a diagnostic tool. And our professor, who is a doctor of Chinese medicine from China, she said that in China, like if a female's period disappears, they're running to the hospital being like, oh my gosh, my period isn't here. It's really light. Like, what do I need to do to get it back to like how it should be? And then here it's like, I remember so many friends taking the pill to skip their period because they didn't want it. And they would do that all the time. And, but there's all these sort of conflicting theories. Like I remember asking my doctor about that, whether I could do it when I was younger. And they're like, you know, like there's potentially there's a higher incidence of ovarian cancer or cervical cancer because women are getting way more periods than they used to, because they're not having as many children as they did 100 years ago. They're like, at your age at 25, you might have 4 kids by now. 100 years ago, and maybe that's why the incidence of these cancers are higher. So there's all these different theories, but anyways, so Chinese medicine, vital sign. The period, it shouldn't have pain all the time, every single time. It should be of bright color, healthy blood color. It is normal to change, like as the period ends, the color does change, the consistency does change too, like as it's sort of going away. Mm-hmm. But for whatever reason, Chinese medicine has a phenomenal effect on gynecological disorders. So even for me, I'm susceptible to getting menstrual cramps, so I'll usually throw in a few points and it's manageable. I usually don't have to take painkillers if I have acupuncture. And say if I only do acupuncture once for brief, maybe I have to take one Advil if I want to, but like I don't need to. They're super manageable. Mm-hmm. You can change the quality of the blood, the cramping, the locations of the cramping is treated in a different way. So if it's like more frontal, we treat like the sort of Ren, spleen, liver channels. If it's the low back going down the legs, we might treat the kidneys a little bit more. Sometimes women get it in the thighs as well. So it all depends. So we would address and change or treat each person differently depending on how the pain manifests. If you get pain before the onset, during the onset, or after the onset, those 3 things mean different patterns. So we treat those differently too. So usually if it's before, that's just chi stagnation. There's like a traffic jam. And as soon as you create flow, the pain subsides. So we treat that a different way. If there's pain during, again, we want to just help that flow a little bit better so that it's smooth and there's not like a traffic jam. You want smooth traffic out of there with the chi, the blood. Mm-hmm. And then if there's pain after, that's usually an association with some type of deficiency. So in Chinese medicine, that might be called like a chi or a blood deficiency. And that's not necessarily meaning you're anemic, but something is missing in the quality of the blood or the chi, that if you're more nourished, you might not have that pain after. So again, looking at diet. And I think it's important, especially if like, I'm not sure who most of the demographic is that you reach with the podcast, but
me neither.
Female athletes in their period, it's so common for highly competitive young athletes or even pro athletes. They don't get their period because their body fat percentage is so low. And, there might be some implications for that for the future of like fertility issues. And, I'm sure it's probably hard with how high of competitive athletes you can be. Like if you have no body fat percentage, you probably won't get a period. And anyways, I know like for younger athletes, that's okay and considered normal I don't know. It just seems so backwards to me now that I have this other sort of lens and view of looking on things. And I do think that if there are young athletes out there, and it's getting more and more common to be vegetarian or vegan, like young females, and as a menstruating female, if you're an athlete too, that's just something to consider to make sure that you are fully nourished with whatever your diet is, getting the protein that you need, the fats that you need in order to keep the menstruation happening as best as you can. Mm.
Yeah, I think that often it's such a taboo conversation to have. And I mean, I don't really have the conversation a lot with women. So
I love that we chatted about this.
Yeah, like it's something that I'm very interested in. I've done enough research into the increased rates of ovarian cancer, and then even how there's a high rate of breast cancer if you are avoiding your period. There's kind of a because I think the original birth control was actually created by he was a Christian fella, and so he was a part of the church, and the church really had a lot of backlash against that because their ideology was that shouldn't be, that women shouldn't be hindered in any way to produce children. That was kind of the philosophy. And so So he went through a lot of difficulty with that and kind of getting it onto the market, even though for him it was from a moral perspective, it was something that increased quality of life for people. Because if you don't want to have children and you end up having children at a young age, there's tons of data and research to to indicate that, like, if we have kids later, then they tend to be more successful, you tend to be more successful, all these other things. But yeah,
Totally. And
yeah,
that's why it's awesome too.
hmm,
Like
yeah,
it's
seriously,
giving it's giving everyone a choice. And yeah, for sure, improving quality of life if that is your choice,
mhm,
if that's what you want. Um, I think, yeah, with Chinese medicine and birth control, or Chinese medicine and the menstruation, I think if you're a female out there, or if you're a menstruating person, whatever you choose to identify as, if you have polycystic ovarian syndrome or something that's idiopathic in Western medicine, if you're constantly in pain or super heavy periods that just aren't normal, like if it's affecting your quality of life and the only answer with Western medicine might be to put you on birth control, and if that's not good enough for you, or if you don't want to go on it, try exploring Chinese medicine acupuncture, or especially a Chinese medicine practitioner that can prescribe herbal medicine, because I've heard phenomenal things with the application of herbal medicine in conjunction with acupuncture to really change the manifestation of your menstrual cycle.
mhm,
Like there are options which uh, that are definitely worth a try if it's really affecting your quality of life.
mhm. Yeah, generally, I think the route to that is just having conversations about it, because it's so taboo, and um, it's easy enough to ask why it's taboo, and I think that a big part of that is people don't like blood, and maybe that's the issue. But I think that
Yeah,
it is like unbelievably important to have conversations about it, because, like you said, young women are there's some imbalance if you're not having your menstrual cycle and you're not on birth control, or like you're a young child, not a young child, but like you're a young woman, and that's a natural part of life that people should have the opportunity and the encouragement to speak about.
yeah. I think it's important to say too that when you first get the onset of your period, it's going to take a few rounds for it to normalize itself. And I don't
Mm,
think we're taught that either. Like if a hormonal feedback loop is working for the first few times, like think of a machine's kind of like first turning its gears. It's not
yeah.
going to be fully functioning the first few times. Like, and it might be painful and there might be some discomfort. And yeah, there's going to be some crazy emotions involved. And that's okay. Like, give yourself a year, even. Like, give yourself maybe 12 cycles before you think, I just want this gone. Because maybe the hormone feedback loop system is going to regulate itself a little bit better. Like, just give yourself the time. Or if you're a mother of a menstruating child, like, maybe consider that too. If, we're starting to get periods sooner too.
Hmm.
So, like, do we want, anyways, again, I'm not against birth control. I
No, that's
used it
such a good
myself
point. I think
for
that's a
like,
very good point.
yeah. And that's what I learned when I was in Chinese medicine school too. And I was like, oh, that's so true. Like, even for us, if someone were to come in and be like, oh, my period is so irregular, I really want to address that. Well, I would be like, okay, let's track it for 3 months. Because if it's just early once, or if it's just late once, or if it's super heavy just out of the blue moon, that's not necessarily unnormal to us. If it happens 3 times, 3 cycles in a row that these patterns are happening, okay, then we have some, like, it's almost like doing research. Okay, here we have some evidence here.
Hmm.
Did this 3 months in a row. Like, there's different factors that are going to change your menstrual cycle. Stress can, moving can, your diet, like that might make it very irregular once, but track it at least 3 months, keep track of everything. And then you kind of have a basis for treatment. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, because I know lots of girls that first thing they had their period, they jumped on birth control right away, because, like you said, it was really heavy flow, and they couldn't deal with it. They couldn't deal with the pain. They couldn't deal with the blood, and it's all very frightening. I would assume. I obviously don't have experience with that personally, but I
Mm-hmm.
assume that it's very frightening. And
Mm-hmm.
so I know lots of people that just want to kind of get it out of the way.
Yeah. And I can imagine, like, like my parents are baby boomers and children of baby boomers, and like we didn't really talk about it all that much. So if, as a parent, or if your parents weren't openly talking about every little detail about it to make sure that you were fully aware and like okay with it as a young person, then you have nowhere, like, where do you have the information or the resources, right, to
Hmm.
make that educated decision for yourself, or like know that it's okay and have that support. I'm not blaming our parents. I'm not blaming the
Yeah.
education. I mean, it'd be nice if there was more things included in the education system, but I think so much gets thrown on the education system that that's not fair. It shouldn't only be up to them.
Hmm.
Um, like exactly what you're doing now. I'm so glad you invited the topic of discussion, because it just needs to be included in the discussion more that it's a part of life, and it's a beautiful thing.
Hmm.
It's how we procreate. It's necessary.
Yeah, it's a natural process.
I
It's a
think
very natural process.
the younger generation are doing a good job. There's like a lot more awareness and openness, and sort of there's a more liberal approach to like everything, and I'm loving it,
Hmm.
of the younger generations for sure.
The platforms for access to information are just unbelievable. You can go on TikTok or Instagram and find almost anything and find any information on anything. You can find any niche, and I think that's an important. I think there's a very important kind of visual, informational, uh, kind of cross section. They've been woven together, and I think that like YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, like that visual platform and that auditory platform, the same thing as podcasts is. I think that that's going to over time it's going to take over books. Like people are like there's no point in reading anymore if you can just listen to everything, and you're converting
Uh,
a few hours per day maybe of your commute to work. You're converting that time now into information that you're getting through these
yeah,
mediums, and so
and just hoping that it's good information, because there's
yeah.
even me, like one thing I wanted to say before we ended this is like I did my best to communicate my limited knowledge. I'm like a specialist, I went to school for like 4 years for traditional Chinese medicine, and I'm still continuing my education all the time.
Hmm.
But this lineage I'm in my infancy of my understanding of it, so I've communicated it in a way that I've understood it, and I hope I did it justice, and I'm going to continue to educate myself more, and same with my tidbits, even on like the science, the limited knowledge I have with my undergrad and how I keep up with it. So I hope I didn't offend anyone, and I'm totally okay with being fact checked. But what I know, I'm not claiming that it's mine. This is like coming from thousands of years of the Chinese medicine lineage. And I think as it gets passed down through generation, it's constantly getting changed. So for the better, modernize and change to be more applicable. But at the same time, I hope that foundation and the beautiful theory and why it works in the tradition is kept, because it's a beautiful thing.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Very well put. Do you want to finish there?
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, I
Lovely.
could chat all day, but I can't. I have stuff I need to
Yeah,
do.
yeah. Go do your stuff. I don't want to keep you for
Thank
too long.
you so much, Josh, for this opportunity. It was so nice to see you again. And I think it's so amazing you're having these really beautiful conversations with all different kinds of people, and just everything you've articulated and everything you've done and what you know. It's so cool to see just, how far you've come and I've come since the last time we saw each other in 2016.
Long time. Yeah. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for coming on. I was super interested in this. I had been reading your posts and kind of following along with your journey for a while now, and I really wanted to get your perspective. And I think the timing came at a very serendipitous timing with what's happening in the political spectrum. So
Yeah,
I think that
100%.
this information is intangibly beneficial for lots of people, and kind of the opportunity to understand more about the Eastern philosophy and Eastern religion is becoming more and more of a part of Western culture, I think. And so the opportunity to have you on was very important to me. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Yeah, if people are interested and just love the sort of learning more about it, that's kind of what I've made my Instagram, my professional Instagram for. It's basically traditional Chinese medicine education for the average person. So
Mhm.
if you just want to know more, I usually drop like 2 things a week. That's just taking little chunks of the theory, so that if you do get acupuncture, now you're like, oh, that's what they meant when they talked
Mhm.
about that. Um,
What's your
just trying
handle?
to mainstream it as best as I can.
What's your handle? Plug it.
It's Jacqueline underscore TCM,
How do you
uh,
spell Jacqueline?
JACQUELINE underscore TCM.
Perfect. Awesome.
Sweet. Okay,
Thanks a
well,
lot.
thanks, Josh. Take
Yeah.
care. Bye.
I hope to do this again sometime. That was
For
awesome. I really
sure. Maybe
appreciate
in
it.
like 5 years, see how much we know then too.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'm
We'll be
sure I'll
so
know
much
nothing.
smarter. Okay.
I'll probably know less.
Yeah, there's always more to learn.
It's the Socratic paradox. All I
Yes.
know is that I know nothing. All
All
right, get
right.
out of here. Go do
Take
your
care.
stuff.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.